But it's just a few weeks now until the government publishes its plans to reform the planning system. In opposition, both the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats poured vitriol on what they portrayed as Labour's plans to build all over the countryside. Now they're in government, they stand accused of exactly the same thing. Among their more vocal critics are such notorious firebrands as the Daily Telegraph and the National Trust. Another, the Campaign to Protect Rural England, has now produced a map showing the great swathes of countryside it claims are at risk. Jenny Kumar reports.
The Devon countryside, a vast and natural asset. There are fears, though, that more and more of it will be built on.
You can see in the distance that's the Dartmoor National Park, and over the hill here is the AONB, and this is one of those areas which of course doesn't have a discretionary classification over it, so it is in a way sort of free for development.
Robin Hogg is the chair of the Devon Campaign to Protect Rural England. He's developed a map which identifies sites like this one near Totnes, which he says will be more susceptible to development if the government's planning reforms go ahead. On the map produced by the CPRE, the brown areas represent countryside that it says will be more at risk because of the coalition's radical overhaul of the planning system.
Local communities should have a greater say in planning, but from today, we will expect all bodies involved in planning decisions to prioritise growth and jobs. We will introduce a new presumption in favour of sustainable development so that the default answer to development is yes.
But Robin fears this will lead to unchecked and damaging development.
I don't think anybody knows what sustainable development is. In the old planning system, there was a priority, for instance, for developing on brownfield sites before greenfield sites. That seems to me now to have been got rid of by the government. We would certainly want to see that back.
But conservation groups were also critical of the previous government's top-down housing targets. Wind back a few years and the parties now in power were laying into Labour for trying to build in the countryside.
Here in Park Bottom, basically it's been merged into the wider Camborne, Iluggan, Poole and Redruth area, and that doesn't reflect the needs of our community, not just here in this area, but also in more rural villages where they are desperate for more affordable housing, but under the regional spatial strategy as it currently stands, there's absolutely no scope for sustainable development.
The CPRE is among several organisations, including the National Trust, that has spoken out against the coalition's changes. But ministers insist their reforms are not about a choice between the countryside and concrete.
Our countryside is one of the best things that makes Britain great, and we will protect it.
The new planning framework is due to be published in April, and campaigners know this is their last chance to get the government to think again.
Jenny Kumar reporting. Well, Robin Hogg is with us here in the studio. You, as an organisation, had a go at Labour's plans. You're now having a go at the coalition's plans. What would you do to solve this incredibly difficult problem?
I don't think it's as difficult as people make out, to be honest. If you look at our website, you will see where all the planning applications are in Devon, which is a huge county. And what we have is most of the planning applications are appearing on this undesignated land.
So they're anticipating the change in the guidelines, is that what you're saying?
I think they probably... No, I think they are just looking to get planning permission where it's that much easier, and I don't blame them for that.
But that's based on the changes the government's...
Yes, I would say almost certainly. What is happening, of course, now, so far as we can see, is that there isn't going to be a free-for-all, and CPRE certainly is not a NIMBY organisation. We want to see development, but we want to see it as sustainable development. There is no point in dumping a housing estate on a village which has no infrastructure, no schools and all of that. What we would like to see is, and the localism bill might help this, is local communities telling the authorities where they see the best place for this housing is. And so far as CPRE is concerned, our prime aim this year is to get affordable housing. And one of the great difficulties we face is that because we have a big economic collapse at the moment, there is no money to be made in putting up new development sites unless there is a very high proportion of sites which are open market houses. And therefore it's very difficult to get this key requirement which is affordable
I doubt that
housing.
either of our guests would disagree with that in principle. But John Burnett, if I just remind you of what some of your Liberal Democrat colleagues said in opposition. Colin Breed said Labour had indefensible plans for unwanted housing against local wishes, a developer's charter, Tim Farron forcing councils to identify ludicrously large amounts of green land, Martin Horwood vastly increasing house building greenfield sites. Does that look rather like the pot calling the kettle black now?
It perhaps might do. We don't want a top-down system, which is on high numbers.
Are you suggesting that the coalition's plans are a developer's charter?
We're not. We don't want a top-down system. But what we do need, what we do recognise, we're in office, that there is a huge housing crisis, and it's getting worse and worse and worse. If I could remind you all, and your viewers, that there are 185,000 households in the southwest that are on local housing waiting lists. We have a huge demand for housing. In 2010, 103,000 houses were built, and the housing demand, household demands, was something like 233,000. There is a massive housing crisis which has to be resolved, and it is incumbent upon us to do it. We are not going to build outright on green fields. Obviously, the designated areas are not included, national parks, AONBs. We have the same similar protections for greenfield in the national planning strategy as has hitherto applied, but we have to have some level of aim to achieve more house building.
Are their plans better than Labour's?
It depends how it works out. I mean, we support localism as an idea. My worry in CPRE Devon at the moment is these local rural communities just are not able to develop this new neighbourhood plan to get in front of authorities what they want. And I do worry that we will have a sort of difficult time because the local plan is going to be paramount. There are some areas, Torridge being one, who hasn't even got a core strategy at the moment.
What to bring in, Jude?
Yeah.
Of course, I mean, you wanted to build nearly 70,000 new houses in Cornwall.
Well, not personally, no. I think...
But you're in favour of the idea?
Of building houses. I think
70,000.
I think there's a kind of mismatch, isn't there? Because property developers want to build houses, but not necessarily for the people that we want to house and that we need to house, the people who can't afford to get on the ladder already. And it seems to me that this new planning framework is actually all about giving the developers the power. And as you mentioned with the local plans, a lot of local parishes and towns are not set up to deliver these plans, but the presumption is in favour of development. So if a local community does not want development, it's up to them to prove to the developer, to the planning people, why a development should not happen. And that gives much more power to the developer than local people.
We're going to have to leave it there. Thank you, Robin.